Hello, welcome to the video. What this video is about is how to do a DIY recording for your band. In this scenario, it's a brass band. It's a band I'm a member of, and I recorded this concert live. It's the Flixton Community Band. Now, you can do this with any band really. It's basically a stereo recording from the middle of the room. In this case, it was the middle of the room, maybe 2/3 back. I have been in this room before and heard bands playing here before, and I think the best sound is in that sort of area. It will vary depending on the room. I could have taken it closer to the band, but then it might be in the way of the conductor. I wouldn't have gone any further back because then you hear a lot of the sound bouncing off the back wall. So that varies, that's a bit of experimentation. So what we have here are two microphones. This is a pair of microphones that are going into a recording device. This is another recording device. Let's just go to the device that the microphones are going into. So the two microphones are going into this device here. This is a Zoom F3 field recorder, and it's really good for live recordings because it's one of these new range of recorders that's in 32-bit. Now, without going into the geeky side of it, that essentially means that you just plug the microphones in and press record. You don't have to worry about setting levels or anything like that. You can't overload it, which is amazing. Setting levels has been the bane of most sound engineers' lives for many years. Now, going back to this device, this is a simple 2-track handheld recorder which I've put on a little stand here and was on the table. And this, you do need to set the levels because it's not 32-bit. So there it is again, a closer look for you. It's got its microphones on the front there. And these are the microphones that I use. These are Lewitt microphones that are matched pair. They're very affordable, small microphones. So that's them, and I'll just show you the general prices of this setup so that if you do want to do this yourself, you can. So the handheld recorder is, well, it's less than 100 quid for this particular model. There's different makes and models. I've always used Zoom. I found them very good. You'd need a little stand, so less than £100 really. The F3 is around £300, but then you would need microphones with this as well, and you could use a whole range of different microphones, but you'd need two of the same microphone, ideally a matched pair. And so I've used a matched pair of Lewitt LCT 040s, and they're about £160 a pair. And then you would need stands and leads. So, you know, for the 32-bit setup, you might be talking around £500. But for the simple handheld device, you're talking less than £100. And really, if you're doing a live recording and you want to make sure you capture it, my advice as a sound engineer is to do at least two recordings. So have at least two devices recording independently. And that's what I've done here. I probably wouldn't have used the Zoom as one of my additional devices, but I did it because I wanted to sort of demonstrate what it sounds like on a really low budget. I could have used another set of microphones or another recorder of a similar sort of value, but maybe the £500 area might be a bit outside of what some people would consider DIY and budget. So I'm just demonstrating the two options here. Once you've done the recordings, you'll have the audio on the device itself on a little SD card, and then all you do then is transfer it to your computer. Now, these are the files from the F3, so these are 32-bit. So what's happened here is it's exceeded the threshold, and it's distorted quite heavily. And as I said to you before, you can't ruin a 32-bit recording. There's no level to set, so it was going to distort anyway. But it's quite simple, and I know from experience that you need to reduce the gain by about 30 decibels. And I'll do that now, and that gets it into sort of a ballpark that's workable. And so there you go, I've reduced it to 30 decibels. I've already done this other one here as well. So the other thing it does, because it was a long concert and I just pressed record and left it, there's no actual individual files created by me. It was just one long recording, but the device seems to, or all devices seem to have a limit, and they then chop it inconveniently, usually in the middle of a piece of music. So what I always do is I always join everything up. So I'll just make one very big file by pasting it all together. So whoops, I've made a mistake there. I've not selected all of the track. That's what happens when you're talking as you're trying to do something. So here we go. Let's try again. Right, so this should be the whole concert now. Right, so there we go, and I can see that it has joined where it was meant to join. So that's good. So what I'll do now, I'll just save that, and then I'll show you the files from the other device. So these are the files from the Zoom H1, and as you can see, these look completely different, and that's because I had to set the levels manually to avoid it distorting. If those devices distort, then the audio is ruined. It's not the same as 32-bit audio, and so you might want to think about that in your decision on what to purchase as well, because you know there's no point in doing a live recording if it's just going to be a distorted mess at the end. And the 32-bit really makes it a piece of cake to actually do the recording. You can't go wrong. So there we go. I've joined those two together in the same way I did the other one. And I'm going to call this H1N all. Once you've got the waveforms, you've got to do something with them. It's not just a case of recording them and then spitting the file out and listening to it. There is some processing involved, because you won't want to hear the whole concert in one long file. And also, the dynamic range of this file is ridiculous. So, you know, here I can see that we've got a loud noise that's, you know, gone quite high in the audio spectrum in terms of volume, dynamics, and then it goes really quiet. So that wouldn't be a good listening experience. And the same with this one as well. So we'll come to that next. So before we carry on, I just want to mention software. The software you've just seen me use is by Isotope and is RX. It's a software I use all the time, but it is a paid for software. So looking at their website, their latest one is $199. Now there is alternatives, or there are alternatives I should say, because there's more than one. One that's very commonly used is Audacity, and it's probably almost as good as RX, but for what you would need to do for this recording, it'd be absolutely fine. If you go to Google and search it, be aware that quite often advertisers jump on the name to try and trick you into clicking their links and downloading something that isn't Audacity. So Google it, but look down the listing until you see the one that says audacityteam.org, because that is the official website. So you can download that and use it. And then the software I'm going to use next is something called Cakewalk. And again, if you do Cakewalk download, you will possibly see adverts that aren't Cakewalk. What you need to do is go to the one that's BandLab, Cakewalk by BandLab, because BandLab bought Cakewalk out many years ago. It used to be a paid for software. It's had over 30 years of work on it, as you can see by that, and it genuinely has. It was a paid for software up to recently, and they went out of business, but luckily BandLab bought them and now offer the software for free. So it's an amazing piece of software, and I still use it, and I've used it for many years. So let's carry on and go into Cakewalk. So I've opened Cakewalk and I've dragged in the files. So I've got one channel here for my F3 audio, and I've got one for my H1N audio. Now there's going to be various bits of noise at the beginning before the band started playing that I'm going to cut off. So I'll do that in a minute and come back to you. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to line them up so that they're perfectly in sync, because it is the same recording just on different devices. Or the same performance, I should say. It's not the same recording, it's two separate recordings. But because I've got the two recordings, it's handy, because if one's damaged in some place, like if somebody caught the stand or something that the microphones were on, there'd be a big clunk, and one of these things might just be that there. Oh no, that's the H1. So that could be a noise on a table where the H1 was. So there's various things that can damage the recording. So if you've got at least two on the go, you can pick the one that's not damaged and maybe repair the recording, or just use the backup recording. The other thing you can do is you can combine both recordings and see what they sound like together, because sometimes by doing that you get a better and thicker sound. Now, this isn't about multi-track recording, it's about doing a stereo recording live. But if you wanted to get more of a professional sound, you would do a multi-track recording where you'd have microphones on individual sections or instruments even, but you'd still have the stereo pair, as it's called, out the front. And then you'd end up with about, 8 or 10 or maybe more channels of audio in your editor that you would then mix to get the best sound. I mean, there are disadvantages of having microphones in the audience, and that is that you hear the audience making a noise, whereas microphones closer to the instruments will cut out much of the audience noise and just pick up the instrument. But that's not what this video is about, and maybe I'll do one of those in the future. Okay, so let's carry on. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to line these up, and then I'll come back to you when that's all done. So I've got rid of the noise at the beginning, the chatter that I didn't need, and I've lined up the recordings. Now, the way you do this, you find a transient, which is a loud sort of click, pop, bang, whatever, because you can see the spike. And then you just line up the recording using that, and you do it visually. Now, I should have done a big clap at the beginning, really, before we started playing, just in front of the microphones, but I forgot to do that on this occasion. So I've found a click. There it is, and I've lined it up using that. So what I'll do now, I will play you both recordings together. So this is the example point I was going to go to. Oh, before I do that, I'll just explain. The sound of the recordings is quite low. So this is it. So what I've done, I've put a maximizer on here, and this just brings the volume up. Now, I've not finished with that. I'll come back to that later. Now, I just want to say at this stage, the recording is the relatively easy bit to do. The editing and the production is the harder task that takes more experience and knowledge, really. And I can't relay 20 years worth of experience to you in 20 minutes. So what I'm covering here are the basic principles, and you can then go and find similar tools or the same tools and emulate the same thing, really. And you can learn all of this stuff online. There's loads of tutorials, and you would have to do a bit of practice, but trial and error. Get some experience, but it's all doable, so don't be put off by these fancy tools. There are free versions available or cheaper versions, and I'll explain what they do a little bit later. For now, that's the recordings together, and this is the F3 on its own. This is the H1 on its own. Now for me, all I've done with these now is made them louder, and for me the H1 is a little bit duller, a bit muddy compared to the F3 and the microphones. I think the F3 is clearer, or the microphones, I've made it clearer probably, not the F3, it's more about the microphones, I suppose. Playing them together, I don't know. yeah, I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to keep them together or just process them individually and pick one. So what I'll do now, I'll do some processing and I'll come back to you and explain what I've done, rather than you sit here for half an hour watching me twiddle and mess around with settings. First thing I need to do is something called EQ, or equalization. Now, if you remember the old-fashioned stereos where you had a treble and a bass knob, that was it. And that's still it. And then you'd get the graphic equalizer where you'd have all these bands and you'd do a smiley face. And essentially, this is what this is, but it's considerably more sophisticated. Now they all sort of work in a similar way. The one I'm using is called Neutron 4. There is actually one in Cakewalk, but I chose, and it works in a similar way, but I've chose to use this one. So let's turn this on, and this is on the H1. Now, I'll play you the before and after, and then I'll explain why I did what I did. So this is before. And this is with it on. Okay, so you might hear that with it on it's cleaner and clearer, and what I sort of identified with my ears with this recording is that it was quite muddy, and so to sort of combat that, I've put some treble on, and you just have to do this by ear and instinct. So I'll just play you this and I'll move these around and you'll hear how you can sort of so you see it's quite clear what the sound's doing as you're moving these around. And with this one, this is where that sort of honky fuzzy sound is. See, so if I turn it off and then turn it on again, that's the honky fuzzy sound. And the way I found that, I swept around doing this. And then I pulled down to reduce it. And it is just a matter of judgment, really, and what your ears are telling you. So that's where I went with that. And pulling that down brought the bass down, so I added this in. So I added another point in there to boost the bass again slightly. And if you look at this line, no, sorry, I should have mentioned this. The very low frequencies just turn into rumble. So let me solo that. You probably can't hear them actually on your speakers. I can just about feel it on the bass speaker here. But yeah, you want to get rid of those because they just make everything dull and fuzzy overall. So you want to cut that quite sharply. Just to the point where you can hardly hear it making any difference, but it is, you've got rid of that low rumble. Unsolo that. And what this is now, this is kind of the line that you used to make with your graphic equalizer. And so it's that kind of principle. You just pull down what you think's not sounding right and push up what you want to hear more of. And unlike the old-fashioned graphic equalizers where you might have 5 levers, you can add I think you can add unlimited levers in actually on these, and then you can move them to wherever you want to put them. So it's quite a lot of detail, and most graphic equalizers nowadays are like this. So that's what I did on the H1, and on the F3 I felt that there wasn't as much bass as there could be, so I added a little hump sort of around the bass region. So I'll play it without. I'll add it in. So to me that just sounds a bit fuller. So the next step, once we've got some basic equalization done, is to add in some compression, because at the moment I've increased the volume by just using a limiter, which is quite harsh on the sound. It's quite destructive. I can hear it distorted as I'm playing it back. So what we need to do is do some compression before the limiter, and that basically brings the dynamic range sort of together. So basically the low parts that are very quiet will become louder, and the loud parts will become sort of relatively quieter. So basically the two peaks will be close together, and that will mean that you've not got bits where it's so quiet you have to turn your sound up to listen to it, and then you've got bits that are so loud you have to turn it down because they're nearly blowing your speakers up. This sort of brings the range together and sort of squashes the sound a bit, really. Now you can, there's loads of compressors around and lots of them have presets, and I started with a full and warm preset here, and then I've just adjusted this a threshold. So compressors, again, it's one of those things you can go into a lot of details with. You might be better off just trying a couple of presets and adjusting them. This one, you can see all the settings when you get to that stage. I've got a 10 to 1 compression ratio, attack of 25 and release of 300 milliseconds. So if I play this now, this is the H1, and I'll play it with it off. This is it on. You can just hear how it's brought the volume up slightly, and I've moved the threshold. Well, I've moved the threshold again because I think that's better still, and you can see this line is the compression. So you can see some of the transients is dipping the volume, and that's exactly what you want it to do. So it sort of flattens the sound a bit. So I've done that with the H1, and I've also done it with the F3. I'll show you what I've done there. Same principle. So what you want to do is just be subtle with all of these things, and then they all add up at the end to sound hopefully good. If you're too harsh with this, if I pulled this threshold all the way down, it would just ruin the recording, really. Just to give you an idea of what compression does on the quieter sections of the music, this is the H1 on a quieter section without the compression. This is it with. Off, on. You see, it just lifts it slightly, and that's what we're after. Unfortunately, as you can hear, there's drinks being poured, and that device was on the table. So at the same place, let's go to the F3. I mean, these microphones are at ear level, so these are a bit higher. I suppose ideally you need to have a set higher still, really, so that you're above noises of people, hopefully. So this is it without the compression. With. As you can hear, that lifts it as well, and the drink sound isn't quite as bad on that, but it's still there. So now that we've got EQ and compression on each track, I'll just turn both off at the same time. So I'm going to turn off the EQ and the compression, which is all in this one module, so you can hear the difference. So this is it off, on, so that's the F3, and this is the H1. Off, on, and both together. No processing. I think, having listened to it with both tracks playing together, I don't think there's much benefit really. It's just making it slightly fuller, but not in a good way. So I think I'm probably going to choose the F3 track for the final recording. But yeah, it's all about decisions, and that might change as I add more processing. So now I've got the tracks as I think I like to have them. I mean, there's other things I could add on, but I'm trying to keep this a simple sort of process really, for the point of demonstrating what you can do yourself. I mean, there are other things you can add on, like another equalizer, another compressor, exciter, gate, sculptor, transient shaper. I won't go into that. It's quite advanced stuff really. So the next thing you need to do, these are tracks, and these are going to a master bus, which is basically the output, and that's how both are playing at the same time when I unsolo the tracks. They're basically both come into this section. So this is the master, and this is what you will basically hear when I export the file. Now, I've got some things on here that aren't so relevant, so I'll just turn them off. I mean, this is just basically it shows the spectral shape of the audio. We don't need to get too into that, so I'll leave that. This is a loudness meter which we will use, so I'll keep that. This is just so I can stream it to my screen capture. That's doing nothing to the audio at all. You wouldn't hear it if that wasn't on. And so I've got Ozone 9, and I'll just bring that in. It's on my other screen. So Ozone 9 is basically I've been using for the gate. Not the gate, sorry, the maximizer, the limiter, basically to stop it sort of being so quiet. So I've turned that off again now. It's quiet. Turn it on. It's plenty loud enough to hear. Now, it's probably a bit extreme. You can see those dips. It's quite aggressive. So what we want to do now is add in some dynamics. And let's look for a preset. Let's go master bus. Let's try that, see what that sounds like. Now, I'm focusing mainly on the F3 now, because I think that's the one I'm going to use. I'll try a different one actually. Let's try some analog dynamics. So you can see I've just adjusted the threshold so that it's barely just taking a little bit off, and that's what we want. So I'll go with that. That's fine. So then what you can do is you can add in some EQ again. So let's turn the EQ on. I don't think we need that. So quite often, just to finish it off, some top end's good. So I'll just add some in as we play it. Okay, so I've had a play around with the settings and listened to it, and I've settled on this. That's on. Off. Just tightens it up, I think. I've got rid of some of the sort of honkiness frequency as well. Old gramophone. Don't need all that in there. I've brought out some bass. And some top end. Oops. There we go. So, next, what we can do is add in an imager. Now, basically, this makes the stereo, and this is, if you were doing a basic edit, you might not have an imager, but it's quite handy to increase stereo width. I quite like using these. You've got to use them sparingly, like most audio tools. So I'll just play it with this on and do some adjustments. You can see it as well in the screen here. That's wider. I won't go that wide. So there you go. I think that's probably it. The only other thing to do now is to sort out this limiter so that we're not pushing it too hard. So now we can use this loudness meter. I'll just see what the loudness is like. Right, I need it to be a bit louder, and the limiter's working quite hard. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add in another compressor. So I've added in a vintage compressor here, and I've put this before the imager. So what you tend to want to do really is start with dynamics. Sorry, not dynamics, that needs to be there. You start with the equalization. You then put some dynamics on it, and more dynamics if you wish. Then you do things like imaging, and then your maximizer will be at the end. So the vintage comp is just sort of taking a bit more of the peaks off. So I'm going to go back to the maximizer now and just reduce it slightly, I think. On Cakewalk, you've got a waveform graphic here, so I can put the waveform graphic on. And you can see the difference from this lower one, from the top one. That's how it was, and this is how it is now, and this one's much louder. So again, it's experience, practice, and you can learn all of this stuff online. It just takes time. So I don't want to get into too much detail, but I want to give you enough to make you think, yes, I could go and do that. Or, no, I couldn't, I'll hire somebody. It just gives you that information. Now, the other thing that I'm thinking here is, it's quite a nice sound, but I just want to hear it with some artificial reverb added on. So I'm just going to try that. Now you'd want to put the reverb before you do all your processing, really. So before this processor, so I've moved it to the loudness meter. Actually is in the wrong place. It should be down here at the end of the chain, so I might be reading wrong levels there. I'll come back to that in a minute. So let's go to the reverb, and let's just put that on and see what it sounds like. Does it add something? Off. I think it adds something, so I'm going to leave that on. Let's just open the loudness meter again. It's going to be completely different. Yeah, it's a bit loud now. But that's fine, I'm happy with that. So I think I'm done there on the processing. What I will do now is just show you the difference. I'm just going to save it. I'm going to show you the difference now between what we started with and what we've got now. You can see the difference. This top line here and the bottom line, it's the same one, but this is processed at the bottom. But I can turn off all the processing, and this is the difference. So processing on. So this is it without processing. And back on. Bit of a difference. So one last thing I've noticed is on this section when the snare's in, I just feel the snares sort of sticking out a bit too much. So I've added another EQ module in, and again you put this before your dynamics and your compression dynamics are the same thing, before your imager and before your maximizer. And I've just scooped out a bit of the frequencies, so this is it on, as opposed to off. On. I just think it takes out some of those harsher sort of snare frequencies. So I think I'm done. Well, again, when you listen through and you start tweaking, and sometimes it can go on for hours or days. So we're ready to export the files now, and clearly it's one whole concert in the timeline here. So I'll just get rid of this one now because I don't need it. I'm not using it. So this is the whole timeline. So what you would do now is you could go along here and you could go to the start and you could just go, right, play this. Right, that's the start, so that's fine. I've got right to the beginning. And then at the end of the piece, so at the end of the piece now, you decide whether you want the applause or not. It's live, so I do want the applause, and you can split the audio there, stick a fade in it, and then you click on this piece of audio, and then you can just export it. Now, what I tend to do, this was recorded in a 48 kilohertz 24-bit, which you want to record the best and the highest quality audio you can, within reason. You don't really need to go above 48, 24, but that's a big debate that I'm not getting into. I never do, because the file size gets stupid if you go above that, and this format is good enough. It's way above CD quality, and it's massively higher than MP3 quality, and all we're going to do now really is convert it downwards for people to listen to. But this is the best starting point really with these files, because when you're editing them, you want the most sort of information in the file so that you can digitally manipulate it to the best extent. You can't really do that with an MP3. There's just not as much information. So that's why you always sort of start big, and then the end listener gets the smaller file to listen to at their convenience. I mean, sites like Bandcamp do actually allow people to stream and download the full quality WAV files now, because some people do want them. But for what we're doing, I'm going to export this now, and I can export it as a WAV, or I can export it as an MP3. And so I just basically select it in this DAW. I'm not actually going to do it here, to be honest, because I'm going to export the whole file and edit it in RX. I just prefer doing it in RX. So, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I'll export this one. So I don't know the name of this off the top of my head, so I'm just going to call it track 1. It's a WAV on here, so I'm going to export it as a WAV. Here we go. Okay, it takes a bit of time, so I've skipped forward. Now I'm just going to show you what happens. I'm going to open this in RX. I can't play RX because it doesn't come through to the screen capture. But yeah, there's the track, and as you can see, it looks like a proper track now. It's not a tiny waveform. And one thing you might notice, let me just check on these waveform statistics. It's actually lower. It's half a decibel quieter than the full volume. Now, a lot of people are tempted. I mean, we're talking in decibels when it comes to audio, and many people are tempted to go to 0 decibels because that's the highest volume. But really, you might notice I've got my limiter set to 0.5 because that's the safe ceiling. If you go to 0 and you export the files, you end up introducing distortion. I think they call it I'll find out. Yes, so basically it's called inter-sample peak. I think I've heard it called inter-sample peak modulation, distortion, and other things like that as well. And basically you just want to avoid this, and without going into all the really technical stuff that just twists your brain, it's just to stop distortion. So when you convert to like an MP3, it will cause distortion if you start mastering to 0 dB. So rule of thumb, just master to 0.5 and you will be fine. And then once you've got the track, you can then sort of export this to an MP3 and you won't have any issues. So that's how you export from Cakewalk. And like I say, I'm going to finish off by exporting the whole entire track, and then I'm going to chop it up into RX, and then I'm going to name all the files, and that will be the job done. So I'll come back to you when I'm doing that, because there is a way that you need to name your files as well. That's important. Right then, I'm ready to export. So basically in Cakewalk, you click the file you want to export, and this is all one long file. 2 hours worth of audio. In fact, 2 hours 14 minutes. Now this includes all the talking as well, so it'll be shorter when it's edited down, but like I say, I'm going to do that in RX. So what I'll do now, I'm going to call this track All, and I'm going to export this WAV file in its entirety, and then it's going to take a bit of time to do it. And what it's doing now is taking that raw recording and it's putting it through all the processing that we've been through, and the file that I'll end up with will be a fully processed long file that I can then edit into smaller chunks. So I'll catch up with you when I'm done. What I have here now are all the exported and named files. What is important with names is don't just name them. You have to put a number. If you want them to run in any particular order, you need to put a number. 0, 1. I will start with the 0 because 1 won't go in order. So you have to start with 0 and you'll be fine then. Clearly, if you just name these, you know, without the number, you just get them in alphabetical order, and that won't be the playlist of your evening. So that's it. That's the video finished. I'll just now do a quick recap on everything that we've covered. Just one last thing before I do this recap. What I wanted to say is these are all high quality WAV files. So these are 48 kilohertz 24-bit. Now I always export these because, I mean, people don't make CDs very often now, but if you do need to make CDs or vinyl or tape or any format, you need this high quality file. So it's worth keeping these. Now from this I will make a whole batch of MP3s which will be the same names, it will be just another folder and it'll just be MP3s, and those will be the ones that people can listen to and share quite easily. Right, so that's that. Now let's have a recap. So the first point is choice of equipment. Do you go for a lower cost handheld recorder such as the Zoom H1N, or do you go for a 32-bit device with separate microphones? That probably comes down to your budget and how you want to record things, but that's your first choice. Ideally have both, and then you've got the options to record both when you do your recordings. And then you've got to think about the placement in the venue. You know, do you know the venue? Where will it sound good? If it's a live recording, will the audience be a factor? So that's the next thoughts really. And then your recording levels, depending on the equipment that you've bought, you will need to set the levels. If you've gone with a 32-bit recorder, then you don't need to worry about it. But if you've not, then you do need to worry about it, and they need to be right. Record at 24-bit 48 kilohertz. That's my recommendation. There's other ways of doing this. This is what I do. I don't think you need to go higher. You can, most of these devices record 96 kilohertz. There's just no need, in my opinion. It just makes the file massive. And then once you've done your recording and you've got everything sorted and you're at home, you can then adjust the levels of your raw recording by bringing it into your computer. And so again, depending on your equipment, if it's a handheld device, you might have to normalize it to bring the levels up. If it's a 32-bit device, you will have to reduce the gain to put the levels into a workable state. Channel EQ then is your next decision. Really, you've got to think about the sound of the audio and the tone that you want to achieve, and use some EQ, tonal balance. Like I said, Cakewalk has got its own EQ. There's lots of free EQs out there. There's tons of tutorials on how to EQ, but basically it comes down to experience and using your ears. The same goes for compression. So the next step is gentle compression. You don't want to, on each of the channels, you don't want to sort of overdo it on the compression at this stage, because you want to sort of you know, reduce it a little bit as you go. And then when you get to your master bus, you can maybe add on a bit more EQ if you feel that's necessary, and then some master bus compression just to sort of make things even more louder in the mix. And then, like I did with mine, I put some stereo width on it. And then with your limiter and your maximizer, you really need to sort of bring the level up to, I mean, Spotify say minus, they use LUFS, and they say 14 LUFS, minus 14 LUFS. And let me just check that. So here you go, this is from the internet, minus 14 LUFS. This is Spotify's guide. Now, most producers tend to produce pop music higher than this, probably minus 8 LUFS, and I tend to do that with other styles of music. With this one, I think I'm just peaking over maybe about 10 to 14 LUFS. So yeah, your maximizer and your limiter, you need to limit to minus 0.5 dB to avoid any distortion later. And probably before, it should have been on the list, I think, but then you need to think about additional reverb. Do you want any additional reverb? And you know, that's something to consider. Loudness, I think I've covered that now, and master to minus 0.5. So if for some reason your limiter isn't set to that, you will then have to bring it down to this to avoid distortion. Name the tracks properly, and then convert to MP3, and that's kind of it. So I hope that was helpful to somebody. And if you do need help with your recordings and you want somebody to edit them and master them, then do get in touch with me. Also, if you're in the Manchester area and you need somebody to do your recordings, come to your venue and do a recording, then I am available for that kind of work as well. Subject to availability, I do get quite busy, but yeah, just check my website, and if you're going to do this yourself, then hopefully that will give you a good idea on how to do it. And just about all of these subjects can be Googled and YouTubed, and there's loads of guides out there. And like I say, there'll be people that do it a different way, but this is the way I do it. So thank you for watching.